EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I made a lot of decks this year. And yes, I make a lot of decks all the time, but this year I made more decks than I normally do. And of course, I make them for my channel and I make them for my patrons, and I make them just randomly all the time just because I come up with these interesting ideas. But I, of course, also make them for myself. And this was the biggest year ever for me for putting decks together actually in paper. You know, it's funny. I was just looking through my decks and I was like, wow, did I ever do a lot this year? I did more than I ever have before. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 decks sitting here. 10. And that doesn't mean I put 10 together in paper. Some of them I just changed, and I'm going to go through them all. I know I do my personal decks videos, you know, around the same time every year. But there's so much change that happened this year for me with my own paper decks that I thought I would go over some of it here. So I've talked about a little bit already some of these. For example, my rain deck, and all of these changes have happened since I did my personal decks video back in March or whenever it was. So just to give you an idea of the time frame here, my rain deck I originally put together a couple of years ago. I just wasn't loving it. I just couldn't get it to work really, really well. And mostly the reason I figured out is because it's a monolith commander, because of the way I built the deck. You know, it doesn't have to be a monolith commander. You can just build Wizard Tribal with Rain if you want to, right? Because of course it's a wizard and it just has a good ability that whenever your stuff gets targeted, you get to draw cards. That's pretty good, right? But the way I built it, it was very much a monolith commander deck. Again, it's not just about your commander, it's also about the way you build your deck. And I built it that way, and I realized it just wasn't working for that reason. I had to get my commander out. I had to get an aura on it before I could really do anything else. It just wasn't great. Also, I was relying entirely on my opponents to target me with their stuff in order for me to draw cards, which that's not a great strategy either. So I ended up taking the deck apart, and a while later I realized, you know what? I have all these cards already just sitting in my box. What if I just try to tweak it a bit and go in a different direction? And that's what I did. I realized that there is a lot of enchantments. Again, that's the theme I tried to look at. Okay, I want to do blue auras, obviously, but what's a common theme here? And I realized there was a lot of blue auras that untapped creatures, and that's the theme I went with. I went with a little bit of an untapping theme. I went with a few different things. I got a couple different neat combos in the deck. I also have a couple really neat old creatures, really, really old creatures like Leviathan, which is sort of like the original big stompy creature that even in Commander, a 10/10 with trample is scary, of course. Horrible downsides. One of the big downsides is that it doesn't untap, but of course it fits in my deck because I can very easily untap it. It also fits with the rain where, you know, people might want to target my creature. And so if they do, I get to draw cards. And, you know, and I have a phasing theme in there. So after my creature gets targeted, I draw the cards, then I phase it out so I don't actually lose it. It actually works really well. It's still not the greatest deck ever, and it's certainly not my favorite deck to play, but it is a pretty good deck now. So that's a deck that I had and then ended up putting back together, probably swapped out about 12 cards. Next up are the decks, and there's 4 decks total where I just swapped out the commander and then a little bit. Again, when you swap out the commander, some decks you can just swap out the commander and you don't have to change anything. Sometimes you swap out the commander, you know, because it's a commander that's doing something very similar, and then you swap out a few cards. My Dragonlord Jamoka deck, I ended up switching twice. I switched to Malira. I believe Malira was the commander I talked about in my personal decks video earlier this year. I swapped again to Kalendaring Traveler. I really like that commander a lot. I will be talking about it in an underrated commanders video coming up because I think there's, you know, I used that commander just because I thought it worked. The map tokens can help you dig through your deck a little bit, and that's a bit of a combo deck where I'm trying to assemble certain things. And also my commander is getting those 3 mana value creatures off the top, which Painter Servant being the most important card in the deck fits into that category. And there's a lot of others as well. And so for that reason, the switching I did, like I didn't switch out that much. The main deck was essentially the exact same. I just put more 3 mana value creatures in there because why not get more value off my commander? Again, that's another, you know, as I go through this, there's also little deck building strategy tidbits that you can take away from this, which is, if I'm going to switch to a commander that's doing a specific thing, why not? Why not do the thing that fits your deck, right? Synergize with what your commander is doing. I don't need my commander. Certainly, I have, as you will see with a lot of these, I have moved a lot more into the method 2 strategy of I don't really need my commander, although some of these certainly are. Most of the decks I put together this year are method 2, where I just pick a commander that fits what I'm doing and then I try to synergize it around it a little bit. Kellen is certainly that case. Again, other than swapping out a few more creatures that fit the mana value, the only other card I added is Senses Divining Top, which I love that card. I've always loved it, and I've always wanted to put it in a commander deck, and I never have, funny enough. And it actually fits there because, of course, I'm looking at the top of my library a lot. And, I had a Senses Divining Top sitting in my box just waiting to get used. And now I finally have a deck where it fits perfectly. So pretty pumped about that as well. And, obviously I love that deck a lot. My Dralnu deck, which I talked about earlier this year, which was my newest deck when I made that video. And that deck struggled a little, and the reason why is because, of course, Dralnu is just a really tough commander. It is a good commander for that deck, and I can swap it out if I want to. That is a deck that, I can actually, and I talked about some of my 10 deck ideas video last year, I believe, where, there's so many commanders now that are doing similar things that you could just have 2 or 3 other commanders in the 99 and just easily swap them out, right? And change nothing. Again, like I was just talking about, a lot of these commanders, since they're very similar, you don't even have to change any cards. And this is certainly a deck where I could do that. I could just swap my Dralnu out and have it as the commander again. It is in the 99. I would be powering it down. Again, that's a reason to do that. Other than just trying something different, it's also a way to power down your deck, right? So for example, if you're playing an Izzet deck, you can have Niv Mizzet Perun, which is probably the most powerful Izzet Spellslinger commander. But of course, because there's 1,000 others, if I'm playing in a play group where, these guys don't have very powerful decks, whether we're using the power level thing or the bracket thing, whichever you're using, now I can just stick Niv Mizzet in the 99 and take Johan or some way less powerful Izzet commander and use that as the commander. It's a real easy switch, right? And that's something that I can do with this deck. However, I swapped to Ghost as the commander, partnered with Armix. And the reason I did that, I did it for a few reasons. Reason number one, I don't have a partner deck, and I thought, wouldn't be a bad idea to have a partner deck. I also did it because I thought Armix and Ghost were a really great pairing for obvious reasons. One is discarding and the other wants me to be discarding. The other reason was because Ghost is one of my favorite commanders. I really love that guy a lot. I've built so many Ghost decks, and I thought, again, I'm trying to put my money where my mouth is. That's sort of been my theme for the year with building my decks. I made a video about it. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I talk about all these janky combos, and I talk about all these things that people should be doing. I need to start doing more of that. And I really love Ghost a lot, and I wanted to have a Ghost deck. And also, he just works so great in the deck. It is a persistent petitioner's deck, right? And of course, when you're self-milling, Ghost works extra good there. So the first ability of the persistent petitioners basically becomes pay 1 and tap a draw card, right? Because I just mill whatever card into my graveyard and then attack with my commander and get it right to my hand, right? So it's such a great, just really good value. And of course, with a lot of other things I'm doing in the deck as well, I would get Ghost out. The few games I played when Drowning was the commander, whenever I got my Ghost out, I was like, oh, here we go. He was he was the best card in 9-9. And I was like, I could just make him the commander. It made the deck more consistent. I'm trying to do some really interesting things in that deck. It is a difficult deck to play. And I just thought, I'm already putting myself in a bit of a box here and I'm making my life difficult. Why not have a better commander? I mean, it's certainly not a powerful one. It's certainly not a scary one. I'm not breaking rule number 1 here, but it is a little bit more consistent. Again, when you're trying to do those janky, interesting things, having that consistent value-y commander can be really, really important in making things work more smoothly with your deck, right? So that was the switch I did there. I also did a switch with my Arthus deck, and I think I've talked about this already. I'm not sure. I have completely embraced the Universes Beyond because I actually have a Universes Beyond commander now, my Eddie deck. I'm not sure exactly why. I didn't love Arthus because, as I correctly evaluated when I first saw that commander. The manifest and the +1/+1 counters just do not work great together. I was doing a couple funny, interesting things in that deck. The main purpose of the deck was it is obviously it's a colorless deck. That on its own is sort of a deck building strategy, right? And obviously a huge restriction there just doing that. And I kind of always wanted a colorless deck because I like the idea of having that deck building restriction, but also it is basically an alt win con deck. I just have a whole bunch of alt win cons in colorless form, obviously, that are all dealing with counters. I noticed a theme. I'm like, all these alt win cons in colorless form all happen to be using counters. So it's a counter deck, a proliferate deck. Obviously, I have lots of proliferate effects in there. Well, as many as I can. There's obviously not a ton in colorless form. And I just thought Eddie was better as a commander there. Again, it's a commander that is doing exactly what I said. It's more consistent, more value. It's just giving me card draw. That's it. It's just a card draw engine in the command zone where all I need to do is get one counter on it, and then I can start proliferating and obviously use it to just draw a bunch of cards and get to where I need to go. It works in the deck, and it also helps me to do what I want to do in the deck. And again, I switched out not very much at all. Obviously, my commander wants to be attacking and wants, other creatures in the deck to be attacking. So I did put a couple of creatures in there, a few more artifact creatures that I can be swinging with to get more counters on my commander. I also put in Bubble Matrix, funny enough. And I think I told the story about how I actually got Bubble Matrix for my Questing Beast decks. I thought might be a good fit there. And then I thought, actually, it's probably not a great fit because I'm fighting all the time. And I just chucked it in my Eddie deck, and it actually is a great fit there. Why? Don't have to worry about losing my commander in combat because obviously it's not a big scary creature and I want to be attacking with it, or any of my creatures for that matter. But also, my commander becomes an infinite blocker. I just have this flying creature that just sits there, and I can just block any giant creature that comes my way because it's not going to take damage in combat, obviously. And because my win con is not combat damage, I think it's my only deck where combat damage is not my win con. Now I can just sit there, it becomes sort of a pillow fort strategy where I can just sit there holding off my opponents until I get my, Millennium Calendar or my Darksteel Reactor or whatever online and working and winning me the game. So it's a very unique deck in what it's doing, very different from pretty much every other deck I have. So again, another deck that I swapped out maybe 3 or 4 cards. That's it. Swapped out the commander, 3 or 4 cards, and the rest is the same. My Tgar deck is one that I have definitely brought it up on my channel, and I even showed a gameplay video or a piece of a gameplay video where I actually played it very successfully the first time. And that one is a funny one. Again, the genesis of some of these decks is really interesting, how they come about for me. This one is, I was actually in a game where I can't even remember. I was playing a game with my patrons, and one of them was doing something, and Tgar was mentioned. And I was literally sitting there in the game thinking, hey, Tgar would be an interesting commander in a life gain theme because, of course, if you use his ability on yourself and you're below 20, because, of course, the magic number there is 20, you're either going to go down to 20 or up to 20. And I thought, well, a funny way to use that commander is I just pay my life down to 1 and then play my commander and jump back up to 20. So it's good in a pay life strategy, which of course black does the best. And then also I'm gaining life because when you make that jump, you are gaining life. So I could throw Well Lost Dreams in there. That'd be funny. I thought it was a funny idea for a deck, and I wrote it down in my little book to talk about in a 5 builds video, which of course I did. But before that 5 builds video even aired, I ended up, because I liked the strategy so much, the more and more I thought about it, I went ahead with it myself because it fit easily with what I already had as my mono black deck. And of course my mono black deck was, and again, I'm trying to remember, it's swapped so many times. I believe in my personal decks video, it was already a Nadir deck, or maybe it was a Kinzu deck. I think it was a Kinzu deck. So it was Kinzu. I actually swapped my mono black deck to Kinzu. And again, Kinzu was very much a very monolith feeling. I didn't have to, but I really liked getting my commander out before I started sacrificing my creatures just so I could maximize value. So it kind of turned into a bit of a monolith deck the way I played it. Again, not necessarily a monolith commander so much, but the way I played it was. So for that reason, I didn't love it. If my commander got killed a couple times, the deck really didn't do a whole lot. So I swapped to Nadir, which funny enough was originally my mono black deck. And again, I just grabbed a couple of cards, made it in a deer deck, and that deck was very much a just sort of generic, I sacrifice my creature. There was a couple of neat things I did in the deck, but it very much became a generic sacrifice my creatures deck, which again, didn't love that. And I was already thinking of doing a switch and came up with this Torgar idea. And I'm like, okay, well, Torgar wants me sacrificing my creatures. So that fits. And yeah, I swapped out again for Torgar. So it is a different deck. But again, I swapped out Torgar and maybe 5 or 6, well, maybe like 10 other cards in the deck. And most of the rest was the same. Again, I want to be sacrificing creatures. I want my creatures to be dying. All that very much fits. I just had to put some of the life gain and life pay stuff in there. I thought it was an interesting strategy. I want less life. The strategy of I'm going to pay my life down really, really low and take advantage of that. So I incorporated some of those ideas in there as well. And that deck came together very quickly. Winning your first game with a deck like that is also a great way to, hey, this is a great idea after all. So that is now my mono black deck. My Niambi deck, and again, I believe I was doing the Boros version, the Sopina deck, on my personal decks video. Again, I've switched so much this year that I'm actually having a hard time remembering exactly what I talked about in that video. But I'm pretty sure I had my Sopina deck, which was a Method 3 deck. And I don't really want to have a Method 3 deck. What a Method 3 deck is a deck where your commander doesn't matter at all. You're only doing it for the colors. And that I don't love. Method 1 is I'm building around my commander entirely. It's a monolith commander or it's just a monolith deck. Method 2 is my commander fits my strategy. I don't absolutely need it in play. If it gets Oblivion ringed and it's in exile for the rest of the game and I can't get it back, my deck will still do just fine. That's what I prefer. Method 3 is I don't care about my commander at all. And most games I play, I don't even cast my commander because it doesn't have anything to do with the deck. That I don't love. And that was my Sopina lands deck. And so I was trying to switch commanders and I just couldn't find a good one. And so I thought, what about switching colors? And I very briefly switched to a blue-red version, funny enough, because obviously red has a lot of great cards in that sacrifice land strategy and also in the my opponent has more lands than me strategy, right? It's a combination of those strategies. And blue, actually, funny enough, has a lot of land sacrifice stuff too. So I thought I would try out a blue-red version. It was okay. I didn't love it. And then I thought, what if I switch to a blue-white version? Because you really need white in there. White does the my opponent has more lands than me strategy better than anyone else. So not having white kind of sucks. And I thought, well, why not do a blue-white version? And that's what I ended up sticking with. And Niambi is the commander for that deck. And again, another commander that I have recommended on my channel before. And again, putting my money where my mouth is. I thought it worked for a couple of reasons. First of all, it picks up creatures. And there are a couple of creatures that I really badly want to pick up and reuse again. So that actually is very relevant. It's really funny how this ended up becoming the commander for this deck. And I even built around it more. Originally, I wasn't building around it much at all, but now I have built around it a lot more. What I did for Niambi on my channel was, okay, I wanted to be discarding a legendary card to draw 2 cards. And again, commander in the command zone, that is life gain, saves my creatures. It is card advantage. It's actually a pretty great commander, underrated in my opinion. And having that utility commander in the command zone is really handy. Obviously, I don't need it, but it's really nice to use for different things. That commander's actually doing quite a bit. And the more I used it, the more I realized how perfectly it fit in the strategy. The discard legendary card thing works with lands. So if you just have legendary lands in your deck, you can discard a legendary land to draw 2 cards. That's great value, especially in the game when you don't need to be drawing lands. And of course, in my deck, once I get a few lands in play, I don't need to make land drops anymore. So I'll just discard them to draw cards. That's why I originally used it and I thought it fit. But I started to think, man, this really works with a lot of things that I'm doing in my deck, in particular, the discard theme, because I have stuff like trade routes. And I'm like, okay, well, I am kind of discarding a lot, right? I also ended up putting Confessor in the deck because I'm discarding a lot. Incidental life gain, why not? And then I realized, hold on a sec, my commander also gains life. So I went more in that direction as well, because guess what? Zurin Orb, which of course I have in the deck, also gains life. Claws of Gix, which I put in the deck, also gains life. Okay, I'm getting a lot of life gain triggers here. So I ended up putting Well of Lost Dreams in the deck. I also ended up putting Drogskull Reaver in the deck. Again, that's a great blue-white card that wants you to be gaining life, because I realized, man, I'm actually gaining a fair amount of life in this deck. It's weird how I'm combining all these strategies of legendary theme with land strategy with gaining life. And I also ended up incorporating the sacrifice permanent strategy because, of course, again, Claws of Gix sacrifices any permanent. I also put Read the Runes in there, which sacrifices any permanent. Of course, I can use it on my lands, but I can also use it on other stuff. Renounce is another one that I had in the red-white version of the deck that, of course, I kept in this deck that also is gaining me life, right? Again, it was kind of weird how it worked out with all the life gain, but also can sacrifice any permanent. And so I threw a few cards in there with the sacrifice permanent strategy as well, like Hatching Plans is a permanent that I want to be sacrificing. And because I have so many things that sacrifice permanents in the deck, it ends up fitting, right? So it's such a weird deck that is a combination of so many different things. And it's a difficult balance, obviously, and I can spin my wheels sometimes, but again, my commander draws me cards and all of that, so I can get to the stuff that I want to be doing. It's a really neat deck, and I'm really glad I made the switch from red-white, which really just kind of was doing the same thing every time, to this version, which, you know, a lot of games I'm doing a lot of different things. Of course, because I switched commanders but also switched colors, I ended up swapping out a lot of cards. Like, of course, I kept the majority of the white cards, probably, you know, maybe half the deck is the same, right? So now we're getting to more, you know, if we're talking about actually having to order cards and switch stuff out, I had to do a lot more here than I did with any of these other decks. I did swap out commanders, but I also swapped colors. So probably half the deck is different than it was before. Now getting to the decks where everything is brand new. In my AO deck, I'm going to start with here, as I talked about. I think I briefly mentioned that I ended up putting it together in paper in a video. And of course, I put the deck together originally. I mean, again, this is another one that there's sort of a long tail here of, this is a commander that I really liked from Neon Dynasty, and I did a deck tech on my channel. I actually really liked him a lot. And then I realized, oh, I'm reading the card wrong. It's not anything with mana value 4 and put it into play. It's total mana value 4, so you can only get one mana value 4 thing out of those top cards and put it in play. That's not very good. You know, it ended up being a not nearly as popular commander as I thought it would be. It's actually very unpopular. The deck I made on my channel, wasn't really a big fan of that. I was considering putting it together in paper, and it just wasn't really happening. However long later, I don't know, a year or 8 months, whatever it was, I just came up with this idea, and I don't know where it came from, but I realized, hey, the total mana value thing is actually really good if everything is really, really cheap, or even zero, because anything that is zero is free, right? If I look at the top 7 cards and I have 3 0 mana things in there, then I can just grab a sad robot, and all those 0 mana value things are just attack on. They're just freebies. And of course, if I'm doing 0 mana value, I have to do artifacts. And I thought that would be a funny way to go with AO, is a artifact theme in mono white. So just getting lots of value. And that deck, of course, because it was 0 mana value, meant that I was going to be putting a lot of those expensive mana rocks in there, and didn't really feel like running out and buying those all. So that is a deck that sat in digital form. I really like the deck, but I wasn't going to put it together in paper because, of course, all those expensive cards. I was like, maybe someday, you know, if I win the lottery or something, I'll go run out and buy a Mana Crypt and a Jeweled Lotus and put that deck together, because of course I did have those cards in the deck. And boy, am I glad I never did that, right? Because of course those cards are banned now. And in fact, when I did end up putting the deck together in paper, I was even considering, do I want to spring for a Jeweled Lotus? Because of course it's so good in the deck. It's 0 mana value, but also gets my commander out super fast. And this is a deck. I would say this is a method 1 deck where I definitely want my commander out. And, you know, not a big deal though, because if it dies, who cares? I actually want it to be dying. That's why the method 1 thing actually works really, really well there. You want to board wipe, kill my commander? Go nuts. I have no problem with that. It's kind of nice having a dice trigger on your commander, right? But the reason I ended up putting the deck together in paper is because earlier this year, I made a video talking about the eggs strategy, which is a strategy you don't see in Commander a whole lot. Basically, it is I'm sacrificing all of these, mana rocks and things that draw cards and all these little things, getting a whole bunch of value off of them, whether it be mana or card draw, and then I cast a second sunrise or something like that. They all come back into play, and I can repeat the process. And I thought that was a neat idea in the Commander format, and one that really doesn't get much attention. And I realized, hey, that actually works good with AO because AO has a lot of those cheap mana rocks and stuff that is sacrificing that I can get back. I thought that would be an easy way to, obviously put the deck together doing something I like and something else that I like, sort of combining two ideas I like, but also it's a cheaper way because obviously chromatic sphere and all that stuff, that ain't expensive, right? So that's what I did. I basically just took out all those expensive mana rocks and just replaced them with chromatic spheres and all those, egg type of effects. And it made the deck way more affordable and way easier to put together in paper. And I threw it together pretty quickly. And I love it a lot. So glad I put that deck together in paper. My next deck is my Jina Dauntless General deck. And this deck I put together for a few reasons. Again, the genesis for this deck is an interesting one. I wanted a white-black deck. I'm like, man, I love the white-black color combination and couldn't believe I didn't have a white-black deck. Like, why don't I have one? What's going on here? Why is it that I don't have a deck that is white and black? And I think one of the big reasons why I have never had a white-black deck is because a lot of the Orzhov commanders are kind of all doing the same thing. Any aristocrats or life gain sort of strategy is usually what you end up doing in white and black. It's probably the second worst color combination next to Izzet, right? Whenever you think of Izzet, it's like, okay, all those commanders do the same thing. I know they don't actually, but most of them do. And with Orzhov, that's probably the second worst perpetrator when it comes to commanders do a lot of the same things, right? The genesis for this deck came from, again, a lot of ideas I've had where I'm just putting my money where my mouth is. I talk about this stuff all the time, and now I'm actually going to act on it. I had a patron that sent me a deck doctor for a Hack-On deck, and of course, I'm a huge fan of Hack-On. Really interesting card. I talked about him in my original 10 deck ideas video about building around him in the command zone is tough, of course, for obvious reasons. And I applaud anyone who does, but having him in the 99 as sort of a secret commander is a great way to go. And that is a strategy that I've always wanted to do. The deck doctor I was doing was an actual Hack-On deck with Hack-On in the command zone. And that just sort of made me revisit the idea. They also were doing a couple of neat things in that deck that I had never thought of before. And I was like, okay, and I started doing a little bit of thinking, and I started thinking about, okay, the creature type changing thing is another thing that I talk about a lot on my channel. I've thrown out a few different interesting combos and deck ideas there that I could maybe combine into a deck. And of course, Hack-On wants you to be doing zombies. So if I do a creature type changing thing, it actually works with Hack-On because let's say I have a Maskwood Nexus in play, which is obviously in the deck, but I can also do the Changeling thing because that works with Hack-On. So I can have the Crib Swap in there or the Nameless Inversion in there, right? That the typical combos that you see with Hack-On are in there. So I'm doing that as well. I can also start throwing in some funny creature type changing combos that I came up with, like Conspiracy, for example, with Ophiomancer, right? Because Ophiomancer is looking for snakes to be in play. And with Conspiracy, of course, it is doing something very different from Maskwood Nexus. Essentially, the deck is built around 3 cards, I would say: Hack-On, Maskwood Nexus, and Conspiracy. And of course, Maskwood Nexus is turning all my creatures into all creature types. With Conspiracy, I'm basically shutting off creature types more than anything. Of course, I'm going to name Knight with that. If I name Knight, and there's a little bit of Knight Tribal, obviously I'm building around Hack-On, and there's a little bit of Knight Tribal, which seems weird with having Drina in the command zone, but I'll get to that. With Conspiracy in play, I make everything a Knight, but it shuts off a lot of other things, right? And what it shuts off is Ophiomancer looking for snakes. I'm not going to have any snakes in play. That's the combo there. So I'm just cranking out those snake tokens, which is pretty darn good. Also works with other things in the deck. There's a little bit of a sacrifice strategy in the deck as well. It's also a graveyard strategy. Again, because I want to put Hack-On in the graveyard, and I could put any other creature or changeling spell in the graveyard as well once I get going with Hack-On. So of course I got Orc Lore Mage in there, and I have some other Entomb effects as well. So I'm doing that. So I'm combining a whole lot of things here. Another really funny combo that works in the deck. I mean, there's a few, but I got to be careful because there's also some non-bows in the deck. Again, the deck plays very different if I have Conspiracy in play or if I have Maskwood Nexus in play. And one of the things is Pure Reflection. That is another funny combo that I came up with a long time ago, where whenever someone casts a creature spell, it destroys all reflections. So if you have creatures in play that are reflections and a changeling is a reflection, again, if your opponent is playing a changeling deck, they're screwed. They're done, because every time someone casts a creature spell, it wipes their board because all their creatures are reflections, right? That's the funny interaction you get with that card. Shields of Velis Vel, I ended up throwing in the deck. And originally I thought, I'm going to be crib swapping and nameless inversioning with my hack on all the time. And I started to realize how important Shields of Velis Vel is, because it is really one of the only ways to change both either my or my opponent's creatures into essentially changelings, right? That's what it's going to do. Target players' creatures become changelings until end of turn. So it is a way that I can do it on myself if I want to, because there are reasons why I want all my creatures to be changelings, obviously. But also, I can use it on my opponents. And of course, it's a really funny combo with Pure Reflection, because in response to anyone casting a creature, myself or anyone else, I can cast my Shields of Velis Vel, and of course, because it is a changeling spell, I can repeatedly cast it from my graveyard with hack on. The Pure Reflection will trigger in response to someone casting any creature at all. I respond by casting Shields of Velis Vel, targeting that player or any player. Again, remember, it's destroying all reflections in play. So anybody whose board I want to wipe, I just point the Shields of Velis Vel at them, and their creatures will all become changelings, and then Pure Reflection will resolve and wipe their entire board, except that maybe the creature they just cast, right? That'll enter the battlefield and it'll be all alone because everything else is gone. It's a pretty neat combo. There's a few neat combos, but again, I got to be careful. If Pure Reflection is in play, I can't play my Maskwood Nexus, or else now my board gets wiped every time someone casts a creature spell, right? That's why I got to be really careful there. There is a bunch of really neat combos in the deck. I love it a lot. It's a little difficult to pilot because I am trying to assemble things, and I also have some non-bows that I have to avoid. The deck basically plays differently depending on whether I have my Conspiracy in play or my Maskwood Nexus. I have Springjack Pasture in the deck as well. I thought that was a funny fit because I thought, wouldn't it be funny if I could just, because of course all my creatures are goats. Again, whenever you're doing the changeling strategy, and a lot of people do 5-color changeling, I think that's going overboard. Honestly, I don't think there's so much you can work around with the Lord effects and all of that now, and changelings, that you don't need to do 5 colors. I find that everybody does the 5-color changeling thing. I'm essentially doing a 2-color changeling thing, but also I'm doing I'm doing a combo deck as well. I'm doing combos, changelings, graveyard strategies, all combined into one. And I just put some of my favorites in there. And of course I can use Springjack Pasture to just sacrifice my whole team and then add a bunch of mana and gate a bunch of life. It also is good to have because I don't want my stuff getting exiled, especially my hack on. So if someone casts a board wipe that exiles creatures, I can sack them all in response. That's also why it's important there. Why Jina as the commander? Again, the deck plays differently depending on what I'm doing. With the Conspiracy, it will shut off my Jina because, of course, it wants me to be having humans, and they're all going to be knights. So my commander just becomes graveyard hate. That's it. But also, obviously, it makes all humans indestructible and hexproof, which is great if I have the Maskwood Nexus in play. So again, my commander there becomes more useful depending on which parts I'm playing. I do have just a lot of humans in the deck. There is a lot of human knights, and of course I'm doing a little bit of knight tribal. There is a lot of important humans, and obviously there are changelings as well that count as humans. So my commander isn't completely useless if I don't have my Maskwood Nexus. It's basically, if I have Conspiracy in play, it's only a graveyard hate card. If I have nothing in play, it is just kind of good. It's obviously just going to help whatever other humans I happen to have in play. And if I have my Maskwood Nexus in play, it obviously becomes a selfless spirit, or better than a selfless spirit, because it gives hexproof and indestructible to all my creatures. So that's why I chose Jina as the commander for that deck. Moving along. That's right. I made 4 decks in paper this year, and all of them have been in the last 6 months. I mean, obviously all of them have been since I made my personal decks video. That's why there's so much to talk about here. My Plarg deck, which of course again, another idea that I sort of came up with on a whim, you guys have probably watched my videos already talking about it. I made the 5 builds video, Then I made the video talking about okay, there's an extreme budget version that you can put together here. And then on top of that, and in fact, the way I ended up doing it, funny enough, I don't know if you can tell if you've watched the videos, but I was doing the Plarg is my favorite commander to build around video. And as I was doing that video, I actually recorded that video and I might have even been in the process of editing it. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, you could make a super budget version. And the funny thing, how it worked out is we just got the bans, Dockside and all these are bans. And of course, there was a huge discussion about price and cost of cards and all that. It's funny how everything works out sometimes. And I thought, okay, well, here's an extreme, if you guys are having a problem getting to the commander format, here's an extremely low budget, easy to throw together deck that you can jump into a commander game with. Just Plarg, Seismic Assault, done. The rest are lands. And then I thought, okay, wait a minute, I have a Plarg, and it was actually my Lulu deck because I was using the backside, the Augusta. And again, after I recorded the extreme low budget version with Plarg, I thought, hold on a second here. I kind of like this idea. It's very unique. And I have a Plarg and I have a Seismic Assault. And of course, Seismic Assault's one of my favorite cards. I've always loved that card. And the wheels started turning and I thought, why don't I do exactly what I'm talking about in this video? And I was worried that I didn't have enough basic lands, but I did, mostly mountains. So the deck was more mountains than plains. And I just went through my deck box. This is how easy it is, guys. And I actually had the Seismic Assault in my Browlin deck at the time because I wanted to try it out in there. Again, I'm just trying to use these cards. That's what the Commander format is. It's cards I love that I'm trying to use in decks. I took the Seismic Assault out of my Browlin deck, and my Glinthorn Buccaneer was also, I took that out of my Browlin deck. So I took those two cards out of my Browlin deck. I took the land tax out of my Niambi deck because I have land tax in there. So I took cards out of decks, actually, funny enough, and I took the Plarg out of my Lulu deck. So I took 4 cards out of actual decks that I had, right? Because I wanted to do this without actually having to buy any cards. Then I just went through my card collection and I started pulling out cards that work, okay? A few legendary creatures that just happen to work. A Lorn of the Third Path I have in there. Okay, great. Artifact and enchant removal, and it works in the deck because it's legendary. And a whole bunch of cards. Obviously, anything above 3 mana value, you just put in whatever you want. And that's kind of the fun thing about it. Oh, and Zarin Runes, there's a card that I've always wanted to put in a commander deck. It's more than 3 mana value, so I'll just chuck it in there because it happens to, it's a good commander card, I think. And it just fits because anything over 3 mana value fits, right? I stumbled across Sun Titan and I'm like, why didn't I think of that before? Obviously, that's a slam dunk there because it gets my Seismic Assault out of the graveyard. It gets my land tax out of the graveyard. It can just get lands out of the graveyard. So as I'm going through my card collection, I'm actually coming up with like, hey, this is a great fit. That's a great fit. And I ended up throwing the deck together very quickly. I think I had 70 lands in there originally. So 30 cards that weren't lands. The rest were just lands, and played the deck, and I won. I posted the game on there. You guys can go check out that gameplay. Maybe I got a little bit lucky. Things did kind of go my way fairly well, but I thought, that's enough for me. That's enough for me to go, okay, maybe I can actually make a go of this. So I actually ordered some cards that, okay, now I'm actually trying to make it a little more, and obviously I had to order a land tax for my Niambi deck, and I had to order a couple of cards to replace the ones that I was using from other decks, obviously. And then I ordered a few more cards. I started to realize that, my commander's ability, because both the discard ability, obviously, and the ability to hunt for stuff are both, I can do at instant speed. So it's a lot better for me to just pass on my turn, right? I can just play up land and pass. So for that reason, it's a lot better for me to have instant speed interaction. But of course, it has to be 4 mana value or more. So I did a little bit of a hunt for basically instants in red and white that are 4 mana value or more, and grabbed a few that removal, stuff like that. And I put a few of those in the deck as well. So I did it, rather than just, hey, here's this funny idea. I did that, but I like the idea so much that now, okay, I'm doing a deep dive and trying to find cards that actually work. It's a really great deck. I love it a lot. And it is probably one of my favorite decks to play right now. I literally just played it and got into the situation where I get my Seismic Assault out and my land tax and everything, and then immediately one of my opponents destroyed my Seismic Assault, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. And I'm here sitting here with a handful of lands, and I had to work through the problem, and it took me a while. And because my commander loots, it's easier for me to get through my deck to the cards I want to get. And I eventually got to my Sun Titan, and I played it, and I got my Seismic Assault back. And then I started going to town and I ended up winning that game. And yeah, I really love the deck a lot. It's tons of fun. The last deck, my newest deck and the final deck that, I mean, I definitely won't be putting any decks together this year for sure. I have 20 decks, by the way, 20 paper decks now. I like, that's a nice round number. And I think, I don't know, I might keep it that way. We'll see. My newest deck is very much a Method 2 deck. It is built around Spy Kit, and I've always wanted a Spy Kit deck. I had a patron, one of my original patrons with a Spy Kit deck. I think my second 10 deck ideas video I've ever done was talking about Spy Kit. One of those older 10 deck ideas video, I talked about how Spy Kit is such a unique card that you can build an entire deck around it. I didn't love the idea of building a deck around a card that, in the 99 that, what if it gets exiled? Then my deck's not going to do a whole lot. We got another version though. Psychic Paper came out in Doctor Who. And again, I got to give credit to my patron here because they made a Spy Kit Psychic Paper deck. Their deck was completely different than mine. They were doing a really interesting thing in that deck. And again, it was a deck doctor. So I was looking at it. I was doing this deck doctor video and I'm like, man, I just love a lot of these ideas. But there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to do that was different than that. So I thought, again, maybe I'll just throw this deck together real quick. I'll just order a handful of cards and see if it works. I was doing a Bant version, and funny enough, I've always wanted a Bant deck as well. I've never had a Bant deck together in paper, and it's my favorite 3-color combination. And there's a whole bunch of really neat Bant cards that I've always wanted to put in decks. I threw the deck together pretty quickly. Again, used a lot of cards that I just had sitting in my box that, okay, I got ramp and removal that I can just use. Maybe not the best option, but it will work. I chose Takasia, Dig Site Mentor, as the commander. Why? 2 reasons. Again, common theme here. This is certainly a Method 2 deck, obviously. If I'm building around cards in the 99, creatures you control have Vigilance and tap Surveil 1. It is a pretty creature-heavy deck because, of course, I have to be equipping Spy Kit and Psychic Paper onto my creatures. If I don't do that, then my deck doesn't do anything. So I need lots of creatures that can be equipped by those equipment. So obviously I'm going to have a lot of creatures just sitting around, just waiting to be used. So that works with the first ability and also the Surveil 1. Again, just like with the Plarg discard and the Ghost milling and all that stuff, it works with digging into your deck to get the pieces that you want. So I can just Surveil, don't want that, don't want that, don't want that, right? Also, the last ability, 2 green, green, white, white, blue, blue, exile Takasia Dig Site Mentor from your graveyard. So obviously I have to get it in my graveyard. It's not that hard. Returning number of artifact cards with total mana value 10 from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, of course, it's just a way to get my Spy Kit or my Psychic Paper or both back out of my graveyard. So both abilities actually work pretty good in the deck, and it's the colors I want. So I thought that was a good commander. It's also a commander that, again, once again, I thought was pretty underrated. And I thought it's a weird commander because it's doing the artifact theme in Bant colors, but I think it's a pretty good commander and an underrated one. And so, again, just like the Plarg deck, I threw together the initial version using mostly just cards from my card box. Not the best options ever, but decent options. That is the way people used to build decks back in the day, which is kind of fun. It's kind of fun just getting back to the old school way of doing things where I just grab the cards out of my card box and that's my options. I can't order cards online, so I just make decks from the cards that I have on my person. Threw the deck together, it worked pretty well. And one of the things I love most about the deck, and again, one of the things I love most about the Commander format, is I get to use all these funny old cards. And this one in particular, this is a deck where there are so many cards that you likely have never seen in a Commander game before that work good in this deck because of the Spy Kit thing. And I'm showing you a whole bunch on the screen right now, and maybe you can sort of figure out exactly what's going on there. The Spy Kit thing works with 2 things. It works with the same name stuff. So again, something funny enough I'm doing with the persistent petitioners thing, and I say all the time, if you're doing you can have any number of this in your deck, like a retraced image, for example, works there, but it also works with the Spy Kit thing, because of course, I have a thing with that name in play. So what retraced image does there, it does something completely different. Like with the persistent petitioners, it just allows me to put another persistent petitioners in play, or an island, or something like that, right? In this version of the deck, it allows me to put any creature in play because, of course, I guess a non-legendary creature, because, of course, that's what Spy Kit and Psychic Paper are doing, is they're giving them that name And retraced image is looking for the name of a card. So that for 1 blue mana allows me to cheat any creature into play. Pretty fantastic. Bifurcate is another funny way that I can cheat any creature into play. In fact, that I started to notice that theme was in there, where I can cheat any creature into play with Bifurcate. I can also cheat any creature into play with Mask of the Mimic. So, okay, now we got something going here. And that became a little bit of the theme of the deck. And that's why I went with a Bant version is I went with, there's some creatures that I want to cheat into play that I can use for various things. Again, this is a deck that is very fresh still. Again, I just ordered some cards for it that I still haven't gotten. I mean, by the time you're watching this video, I probably have gotten them. It's a deck that probably likely will be always evolving because what the deck allows me to do is cheat basically whatever creature I want out of my deck into play. So for that reason, I can do other things with whatever creature I want to be grabbing. And at any point, I can swap out that strategy. I can keep the main deck together of what I'm doing, but I can swap that out for doing maybe, some new creature comes out that's really neat that I want to use. I can just throw that in there. It basically becomes sort of a toolbox creature deck, which is a strategy I love a whole lot. And, I could probably throw a birthing pod in the deck. I guess that definitely would work. But it becomes a little bit of a toolbox creature deck where I can just go get whatever creature I want on my deck because I do have a lot of cards that work with going to get any creature out of your deck, in some cases putting it directly into play. So that opens me up to other possibilities. So again, I threw this deck together really quickly, just like with my Plarg deck, very quickly. Both of those decks I made in about a 3-week period. I think I put those 2 decks together in paper, and both with the same strategy of I'm just going to mostly just use what I have on hand because I don't know if this is actually going to work really well. And if it does, then, I'll maybe invest a little bit more money into it. So there you go. I essentially have 10 new decks this year. Only 4 of them are brand new in paper though. The rest are sort of just a little bit of changes from what I originally had. I was just going through my decks and I'm like, man, I put a lot of decks together in paper this year. By far the most I have ever done. I think I likely ordered the most cards I ever had this year. Funny enough, after making my video, maybe the funniest part about this, I'm not going to be buying any new Magic cards, right? I actually haven't bought that many new Magic cards, as far as they come out with a new set and then I run out and buy a bunch. I haven't. I'm sticking to that. I haven't really bought a lot of new Magic cards. Obviously putting these decks together, like Spy Kit's an old card, right? Plarg is an old card. Seismic Assault is a really old card, right? So I am actually buying. I bought a lot of Magic cards this year. This is actually maybe the most Magic cards I've ever bought in a year. Obviously putting a lot of decks together in paper will do that, right? But not a lot of them were new cards. Very few were actually brand new Magic cards that came out this year. So I am sticking with that a little bit. So there you go. I built a whole ton of paper Magic decks this year, and I thought I would make an actual video about it. My methods for deck building as well, a lot of that in there also, obviously. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. That's it for today, and thanks for tuning in.